You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Bitcoin, Ether, Ripple, Litecoin, and more. Cryptocurrencies and other digital assets are taking the financial world by storm. This exploding market provides everything a savvy trader needs: volatility, volume, and liquidity. Provided you know how to find it. That's where we come in. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown. Each week, we'll break down the latest trading activity, trends, and developments on everything from coins to tokens, futures, and even OTC options. If it's moving the crypto markets, then you'll find it on the Crypto Rundown. This program is brought to you by Genesis Volatility, also known as GVol, home of institutional-grade crypto options analytics. Whether you're trading CeFi options or DeFi options, cryptocurrencies move. Use GVol Analytics to analyze implied volatility, model realized volatility, structure positions, and unlock alpha. For more information, visit gvol.io. That's GVOL.io. Now it's time to dive into the exploding world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's time for the Crypto Rundown.
All right, everybody. That music means it is time to break down all of the madness, the volatility, the SKEW changes, the open interest, the action, the world of crypto derivatives. Yes, it is time for the Crypto Rundown. My name is Mark Longo from the OptionsInsider.com, as well as, of course, from the ever-exciting Options Insider Radio Network. I'll be your host, your guide here for this roughly 1 hour or so journey through the world of all things crypto derivatives. Reminding you, if you like what you hear, I know we have a lot of people coming to this show who are new to the world of options. All this stuff may sound crazy, weird, intimidating. You don't know what we mean by volatility or SKEW or even things like calls and puts, and we got you covered. Subscribe to the full network, particularly the Education Wednesday content, Options Playbook Radio, Options Bootcamp. Those two shows, you listen to them in their entirety, you'll feel a lot more comfortable. You understand what the heck we're talking about here. Maybe you'll start slinging them their options in your accounts there. Of course, a lot of other content waiting for you on the network, so keep those ratings and reviews coming. It really does help all the new folks we see coming in to discover the network these days. Give them a safe harbor in these troubled waters. And, of course, keep those questions and comments coming, too. You guys have a lot of them these days. As you might imagine, everyone's got Bitcoin and Doge and ETH on the brain these days. We do love to hear from you guys. And let's see who we're hearing from on the old program today. Joining me, Mr. Greg Magadini, the co-founder over there at Genesis Volatility, a.k.a. GVol. Greg, welcome back to the Crypto Rundown program, sir.
Thank you, Mark. Very happy to be here. It's an exciting time in the crypto market.
Yeah. Once again, I have to apologize for having you on at a boring time when there's nothing to talk about, sir. You know, we have to stop doing this, bringing you on in these quiet, tranquil moments when nothing is lighting it up. Of course, I'm joking, listeners. Let's get to it. It is time to dive into the Bitcoin breakdown.
It's time to explore the latest trending activity, trends, and developments across the world's leading crypto market. It's time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Bitcoin Breakdown, the portion of the show we break down all the action, the volatility changes, the SKEW, the unusual activity, the open interest, all that and a whole bunch more in the world's leading digital asset, a.k.a. Bitcoin, a.k.a. the thing everybody's obsessed with these days, including Elon Musk over there. A lot's happened, Greg, even since the last time you joined us, which wasn't too long ago. So maybe let's start there before we dive into the price action and everything else. Catch us up. How are things faring over there in the land of Genesis? Well, I got to imagine you guys are fairly busy these days, sir.
Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of new participants just being introduced to options for the first time. So it's a great way for traders who are sort of new to crypto and are seeing these expensive assets, a way to get exposure with a smaller trading account. So options are a pretty nice solution for some of those newer traders. And so a lot of interest in options in general, a lot of interest in crypto in general. We're seeing fantastic private companies allocating their balance sheet to Bitcoin and hopefully Ethereum here at some point. We're seeing new products come online with the CME Ethereum Future. Gvol is in the process of adding CME data. We're also in the process of creating an educational YouTube series for traders who are new to options, how to think about options, how options work, things like that. And then we have a lot of traders who are trading some of the futures derivatives as well. So there's a lot of nice cash and carry trades, basis trades to be done in the futures market. So that's another data stream that we've been being requested to add to the platform. So that's in the works as well. So it's pretty exciting stuff, no doubt.
Yeah, it is exciting stuff. But speaking of which, before we even get into all this fun stuff, since the last time we chatted, a little birdie told me you may have headed down to South Africa. Is that the case? And if so, what was behind that? Did you just want to get much closer to those new variants of COVID, sir?
No, it wasn't. I was not trying to bring back the new updated version of COVID to the United States. My girlfriend, she's from there, and her family's from there. So we spent some time over there with her family, and we checked out the coast of Cape Town, and it's a beautiful place. I mean, the nature in South Africa is just amazing. So it's definitely worth your while if you're thinking about traveling there. The timing.
Yeah. I'm surprised you're able to make it there and back without getting quarantined for multiple months out there. But I do love the South African accent. It's kind of like half Aussie, a little bit of British, and a little bit of something else sprinkled on top. It's got a nice little twang to it. But this is not the dialect podcast, so let's keep rolling right on into all things Bitcoin here. As you might imagine, listeners, there's been a little bit of price action. We were off last week for the President's Day holiday, even though we did do a little interim show last Tuesday just to keep you guys excited and engaged because so much was going on. But going back to our last show a couple of weeks ago, now our last official crypto rundown, we've seen a big surge in Bitcoin. We were just shy of the 43,000 level on our last show, 42,800. And coming into today's show is 53,200, which is now ticked up. It's threatening 54,000 now, 53,900. So a pretty massive swing, well over 10,000 points just in the last show. Of course, we've seen multiple highs since that show. We saw the rally over 50,000, then into 54,000. We saw it flirt ever so briefly with the 58,000 level. I mean, Greg, it's kind of hard to put these levels into rational terms that the folks listening can understand. Because it wasn't too long ago on this show, a few months ago, we were talking about someone buying the 36,000 calls, and that seemed absurd. That seemed outlandish. That seemed insane. And we were also joking about, hey, maybe someday Bitcoin will hit 1 trillion. Well, guess what? It did that since our last show as well. $1 trillion market cap. So sometimes, Greg, it's my job to put these into terms people can understand, but sometimes I find myself at a lack for words when it comes to all things Bitcoin. Are you having the same problem?
Yeah, it's very interesting. My one of my good friends, he always kind of makes this analogy. He says, what if Uber as a private company, when you were investing in Uber as a VC, had a price chart to it? It would sort of jump up like this. Like it's sort of like a VC early startup equity with a price chart to it. And so we're seeing as kind of Bitcoin breaks into the mainstream and institutional investors are investing in it, and then private companies are allocating balance sheet to it, it's actually just, it's a brand new paradigm. So earlier on, back in 2013, the big question was, will the government allow this to keep happening? And I remember that was kind of the narrative for sort of a bearish market from 2013 all the way to early 2017, basically. And now it's like there's a brand new paradigm. It seems to be accepted. You have regulated entities who are willing to allocate capital to it. So it kind of enforces this idea that the government is going to let it continue on. And even if they didn't want to, they might not be able to stop it, at least not unilaterally. So this kind of paradigm shift just reprices Bitcoin, and you just have this huge step up in price. And now we're at this new crazy level. It's very interesting.
I like that analogy. Listeners, as these startups get rounds of new funding from different VCs and others, the valuation hopefully continues to increase. And we certainly have seen that with Bitcoin. The last round, certainly with Musk and Tesla buying $1.5 billion, we have seen a lot of institutions now start to turn on the gaze, turn on the spigot, start taking another look at Bitcoin. We're going to see some of that reflected here in the numbers as we start breaking it down. Remember, you guys can crunch these numbers for yourselves. GVol.io is the place we go to get all this data and analytics. I know you guys have been kicking the tires and lighting the fires over there as well. If you do that, pull up DEREBIT. That's where we're going to hang our hat. That still is the leading order book, even though you could look at some others and say they're starting to get some paper as well. We're going to hang our hat out there in DEREBIT land. The 1 hour vol out there in DEREBIT coming into Showtime last show was about 105%. So it was nothing to sneeze at on our last show as well. And it's still around that level, 109%, with obviously some intra-week spikes much higher out there. You know, Bitcoin has maintained this north of triple-digit level of volatility for some time, and it doesn't seem like it's going to break that anytime soon. We were just talking about it on our last program, actually. Bitcoin has that type of volatility, that skew shape that is synonymous with a lot of commodities, where as it increases in valuation, the vol actually goes up for a lot of reasons we've discussed on the show here in the past. The calls are usually bid, more volatility as you go up. The vol tends to increase, and of course, you see sharp movements like we have seen of late as well. That also translates into a lot of vol. So for the time being, at least, we're hanging out in the triple digits at 109% coming into Showtime. The 1 hour 30-20 skew, which is that strip of all those options there in the 30 delta all the way down to the 20 delta there. Last show was nice, meaty 13.5. Coming into today's show, it has dropped a little bit down to about 0.5 in the negative direction. You know, Greg, why don't we do a real quick overview there, as we get questions on this all the time. You know, what do we mean about the skew numbers when we're talking about these numbers here and the changes there? And we give people updates fairly frequently, but it's been a little while since we've given our audience a bit of an update. Obviously, we have a lot of new listeners out there, and these are your skew numbers. So why don't you break them down for our audience? What do I mean when we're saying we were at a 13.5 in the positive direction a couple of weeks ago, now coming into today's show, that skew has swung and has dropped to negative pretty much a half?
Yeah. So basically what we're looking at all the call options that have a delta between 30 to 20. So it's sort of these out of the money call options. And we're looking at the implied vol that those call options are averaging. And then we subtract the put options with an equidistant delta. So the put options with a negative 30 to negative 20 delta. And so we compare those two volatilities. And so what we're seeing when we have a positive reading is that traders are paying more in terms of vol for a call in that delta range than they would pay for a put. So what we've seen in mid-January, which was kind of, as far as options activity goes, it was sort of the peak option activity season, and people were paying so much more for the call side than they were the put side. And what we think about, the way we think about it, is kind of like maybe a fear of missing out in Bitcoin price action. So they kind of hurry up and buy as many out of the money calls as they can, so they can sort of get some leveraged exposure. And that causes the calls to be relatively expensive. And so we like to look at the skew to get an idea of where's the paper flowing to, what are traders willing to pay a premium, which side of the ladder are traders willing to pay a premium on? Is it the call side? Is it the put side? And the way you can kind of think of these numbers as well, it's not only like kind of a directional indication, it's also sort of a vol indication. So in a perfectly efficient market, if the call skew is more expensive if the skew is more expensive for the call side than the put side, you can think of it as the spot price rallies, the implied or the realized volatility should increase along with the rally. So that's kind of how you think of a skew in terms of vol. But what we seem to have noticed is that it's also a little bit of a fear of missing out bid. And so we do think there's a directional component to that as well.
Yeah, once Big Daddy Musk gets in there, the FOMO really kicks into high gear out there in all things Bitcoin. Let's see how that's being reflected in the open interest. And it has surged up since our last show. Our last show is about 157,000 contracts open. Remember, one of the cool things we can do in the crypto markets that we still can't do in the quote unquote traditional markets of, let's say, your Apples and your Spies and your Teslas, is check the open interest hour by hour. In fact, I just had a good conversation with the CEO of the Options Clearing Corporation on this network a couple of weeks ago. I asked him this exact question. I said, when are we going to be able to do this in the world of options? And they seemed a little more optimistic than I thought, that we could at least get some updates on open interest more often than once a day, which is what we have right now. So let's take advantage of that. Let's look at the hourly open interest right now out there on DEREBIT. Our last show is about 157,000 contracts open. Coming into today's show is just shy of 190, about 189,000 contracts open. Now, that's pretty strong. That has been growing. Of course, it's well off of what we saw. It was close to 250,000 contracts open back right before January expiration. January rolled off the board, took a lot of contracts with it, and we still haven't gotten back up to those levels, which may surprise some folks, given that Musk and all the hardcore institutions are starting to eye all things Bitcoin, but not quite yet there on the overall options front. Now we get to the overall notional value, though, what they're putting on. That's a little bit of a different story. We had our last show, we were talking about 7 billion or so in terms of notional value. I mean, that's kind of the value of all of these outstanding options positions. Not my favorite way to measure what's going on in the crypto space, but a lot of the folks in the crypto space like to do it that way. Coming into today's show, not quite, but close to 2x. You're talking a little bit over 13 billion in terms of notional value outstanding. The big dog still DEREBIT with about 11 billion, but OKEX coming on strong there, but not quite enough to topple bit.com. Bit.com, a firm number 2 at about 742 million. OKEX number 3, 593 million. Then you got CME all the way there at number 4. 470 million. That's as much paper even OKEX and Bit.com are doing. They're trumping CME, the 800-pound gorilla in the space out there. Number 5, Ledger X, 334 million. Then you got good old Huobi bringing up the rear at 11 million. We won't even talk about BAKKT because they're still at the goose egg, unfortunately. How's this OI line up in terms of calls versus puts? A little bit closer than you might think. You know, traditionally it's kind of been all calls all the time, particularly as you go farther out and down the term structure, get a little bit longer term in the Bitcoin space. It's all the hodlers got to have their calls, right? But these days, right now, given where we are in these, shall we say, lofty valuation levels, puts are starting to get up there a little bit. We're seeing 104,000 contracts open on the call side of the ledger, and puts coming up at about 92,000. I know, Greg, like I said, long term, it's traditionally very call heavy. Are you surprised that we're seeing as many puts open out there right now as we are, or is that maybe not surprise you given where we are from a valuation perspective?
From a theoretical perspective, yes, it definitely surprises me, especially as we're sort of breaking these new all-time highs, went straight through 50,000 and people are gunning for 100,000. So I would expect sort of the activity to be a lot more to the call side given the sort of price action. But we've actually noticed, we've written about a couple times in the past week about the SKEW itself starting to become, less positive and even touching negative territory, which kind of implies that there's this appetite for downside protection. And so I think what we're seeing in the market is that either people who are just kind of naturally long Bitcoin want to hedge and lock in some of their profits, or there's some sort of appetite from speculation on a potential pullback. So looks like we got a little bit of that pullback today, but nothing major. And so I think that's where the appetite for the put side is coming. And you're seeing that in the OI and you're seeing that in the SKEWs.
You're also seeing that in the volume numbers. Post-Musk, we've seen a lot of heavy volume hitting the tape. And this past week was no exception. Multiple days north of 1.5 billion worth of notional going up out there on DEREBIT land. 1.6 billion going up on the 17th, 1.7 billion going up on the 19th. So far today, we had about 1.3 billion on the tape coming into showtime. But as today continues, we could see a lot more paper hitting the tape as well. So those are pretty strong numbers. They're pretty much up there, if not eclipsing most of the other most active days. We saw on the 29th, of January, we also hit 1.6 billion. It's the only other day that even comes close in terms of these numbers out here. So yeah, that's pretty much, these are pretty strong days we have going on out here of late in terms of where people are lining up, where their trades are falling from an expiration perspective. It's still March leading the dance. Crypto does love a quarterly, and that continues in Bitcoin land. March monthly expiration has about 65,000 contracts open, followed by February, number 2 at 52,000. Now, the game changes a little bit. You start adding up all the weeklies in there. It becomes a little bit different. Of course, March has a lot of weeklies now that are very active as well. So interesting to watch. It's still March, but Feb is up there. Of course, Feb's going off the board in about a week or so here. So that'll be interesting to see what's going on with the March. And then, of course, April, and then indeed June, which is the next quarterly out there. In terms of where folks are lining up from a strike perspective, just looking at these strikes, it does bring a bit of a smile, a bit of laughter to my face here, because we're just talking about the 36,000 strike and how outlandish it seems. And now the 40,000 strike is number one with a bullet, 12,000. And guess what? It's over 10,000 points in the money. So it's one of those data points that you kind of have to just laugh at. The number two is the 48,000 strike with almost 10,000 contracts open, about 9,800. The number three, way back in the rearview mirror, the 20,000 strike with about 9,200. Greg mentioned they're starting to add the CME data, not the biggest week out there from an options perspective over there on CME land. The biggest day last week was Tuesday with about 111 contracts, even though they had a decent paper going up on last Friday, 147 hitting the tape. So we'll see if they're starting to see better numbers, triple digits. That's a good sign. Remember, that's a 5x multiplier, but still the numbers have been kind of anemic. So seeing days with over 100 contract volume at CME is a good thing. Futures wise, a bit of a different beast. They've been pretty active of late. Today, about 17,000 contracts on the tape coming into showtime. Last Friday, 16,000. On Thursday, it was 11,000, 13,000 on Wednesday, and 21,000 on Tuesday. Remember, we were closed here in the U.S. for the President's Day holiday. Greg, you said you're working on incorporating CME data over there at GVOL right now alongside DEREBIT and everything else you guys are crunching the numbers for over there. Are you surprised that we're still seeing the numbers we're seeing out of CME, or do you think this is going to start kicking into high gear, sir?
Yeah, so I think one of the big problems right now still with CME is that there's sort of a lack of liquidity. I mean, the ladder has bids and asks across sort of the first three expirations and quite a few strikes, but it's just that the market is so wide. So if you're trying to trade any sort of complicated strategy that has more than one contract, you're really getting scalped on the bid and ask spread. So without executing through an RFQ system like our partners at Paradigm would do, it's almost impossible to trade them profitably. So I think sort of these smaller venues, whether it's DEREBIT or Bit.com or LedgerX or even some of the on-chain solutions, for smaller traders, that's just going to be the way to go. Not only do you not have to deal with this super beefy contract, but also you're going to have a tighter spread and more liquidity to get in and out of trades. So I think until we sort of see tighter markets and maybe the contract was just too big. I mean, a 5x contract on a $50,000 underlying, it's just out of most people's range if you're trading options and you're not like a institutional trader. So I think that combination of the two things is kind of slowing down the adoption. I do think these CME contracts are very good solutions for sort of institutional clients because they're trading, big accounts and these contract sizes make sense for them. And there's a decent amount of liquidity in the future space. But for smaller traders who are trading the option side of the product, it's a little bit tough.
Yeah, it is an interesting dichotomy to watch. The futures doing so much. They obviously have to have the same size issue going on with them and yet not impeding them from a volume perspective. In fact, I put this to the folks at CME who handle the crypto side over there. I was curious why they thought they're seeing such a dichotomy between, the Bitcoin futures doing so much numbers and the options still kind of lagging. They had an interesting idea. They thought that because Bitcoin's moving around so much, you're actually getting a fair degree of volatility, indeed a fair degree of optionality from the futures. So for a lot of people, that could be perhaps solving their options needs. What do you think about that, Greg?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really buy that argument. I think options profiles are a little bit different. I wouldn't want to trade a Delta One because there's so much volatility. I'd rather trade an option and a Delta One to sort of structure the position that I want. But that's me personally. I mean, I don't run the exchange, so maybe they have better insight than I do.
Now, that is the one real sad factor about all this going on that we're talking about here, Greg. We've seen an asset rally from around 3,000 at its nadir in the crypto winter all the way to north of 50,000 right now, with a dearth of listed tradable options available for the U.S. audience, which is obviously the primary audience for our network. We love our international listeners as well. We know you're out there, but for all of our U.S. listeners, it's been a challenge. You can go to your Ledger X's, you could trade the big beefy things over there at your CMEs. That's kind of about it, unless you want to tunnel into like DEREBITs or some of the others out there, which is all sorts of challenges from a EULA and a legal and everything else perspective out there. So, Greg, imagine if we had robust listed U.S. tradable options here throughout this entire run. What a different story it would be, Greg.
I think it would have been amazing. I mean, if I think of a Bitcoin ETF, I mean, we have GBTC, which is decent, but it's a pink sheet listed ETF. If we had a sort of a ProShares ETF, Bitcoin ETF with some liquid options, oh man, something like SPY liquidity, that would be amazing.
Yeah, well, maybe this recent run, it does seem to have rekindled the talk of a Bitcoin ETF. And you're right, that's kind of been the silver bullet everyone's been waiting for. They can approve one of those. The floodgates are open. They have approved some stuff in Canada. Some folks are hoping maybe that'll pave the way, because once you get that Bitcoin ETF listed here, the folks here can trade it in the securities account. They can trade options on it. Then it's a whole different ball game. And you know what else is a whole different ball game? It's the altcoin universe.
It's time to move beyond Bitcoin and find out what's moving the rest of the crypto marketplace. It's time to boldly venture into the altcoin universe.
All right, let's get to it. Welcome to the altcoin universe, where we explore everything else that's been lighting up the the world of altcoins since our last show, and quite a bit. We saw a brief, ever so brief, foray, a sprint for Dogecoin into the top 10. Let's see if we can break in there today. Oh, spoiler alert, no, it's not there this week. Listeners, number 10 is Bitcoin Cash at about 11.3 billion overall market cap. Remember, take these overall market caps with a nice, healthy grain of salt, but the rankings are where the value really lies. Number 9, Chainlink at about 12.2 billion. Number 8, Litecoin, 13.4 billion. Number 7, all the way down at number 7, our old friend XRP, 27 point almost 2 billion. We had a decent week out here. We'll get to that in a little bit, but it's just knocked down to number 7. Number 6, Cardano at about 31, almost 32 billion. Number 5, Polkadot, 32 billion, pretty much even. Number 4, Tether. That's got knocked down to number 4 as well. That's been firm at number 3 for a while. Tether, 34.5 billion. Number 3, Binance Coin, knocking down Tether. Binance Coin now at 39, just a tick under 40 billion. Number 2, it's ETH, 198 billion. You know what the big dog is. Bitcoin, as of showtime, 998 billion market cap. We touched on it earlier, Greg, but we had the poll just not too long ago, a few weeks ago, barely a month ago here on the show, where we only half jokingly asked our listeners, which of these names do you think will hit 1 trillion market cap first, Tesla or Bitcoin? Never did we imagine that they would join forces like Voltron to become one thing effectively for a bit there. But everyone pretty much voted for Tesla in our poll, and it seems like they had it wrong. It was the other way around. Did you ever imagine the next time you came on the show, Greg, we'd be talking about the 1T market cap level for Bitcoin, sir?
Yeah, it's quite a milestone. I remember kind of thinking that total market cap of 1 trillion it was like kind of the big target to look at. Can we get the total crypto market cap to 1 trillion? And now we got Bitcoin alone right there, and then plus all the other coins. So that's pretty interesting. And just to put it in perspective, gold's got a 12 trillion market cap, around 12 trillion. So we're gaining way on the gold market cap, and gold has sort of been the monetary standard for millenniums. So that's just something to think about. It's very interesting.
Certainly is an interesting perspective. Let's go out to the other big altcoin out there that's a lot of people are focused on these days, which is ETH. Actually taking a little bit of a break, at least since we talked about it on our Tuesday rundown last week. Off nearly 11 handles. It was about 173.5 on that show. It's about 117.23.5, excuse me. So almost 11 handles down there, even though in between on Saturday, we did see it flirt ever so briefly with the 2,000 level. I think they hit about 2,040 before it backed off over there. So, Greg, it kind of puts the lie to the fear a lot of people had in ETH land, because since the last time you and I talked about a week and change ago, CME launched the Ether futures, and we all know what happened when they launched the futures on Bitcoin. A lot of people view that as the beginning of the crypto winter. You could finally sell it. You could sell it short, of course, as well, and that led to a bit of a downward spiral in price action. Some folks thought, oh, maybe this might happen with ETH, but no, Greg, it didn't happen. In fact, they hit a new record of market cap out there, a price action really as well, for about 2,040. I know you're a big fan of ETH. What's been lighting up your tape over there at Genesis from an ETH perspective, sir?
Yeah, so definitely some interesting stuff with ETH, kind of to come back to the futures market launch. So yeah, I've argued a lot with people about sort of that narrative that launching the futures could be a bearish thing because you get to short it, and everyone kind of looks back at Bitcoin. I think what sometimes people miss is that Bitcoin rallied on the news of an Ethereum future being launched by CME, and Bitcoin went from around $3,000 or $4,000 in the summer all the way up to $20,000 in December when the future did launch. So I think it just kind of it coincided with a needed correction. I don't think the future itself was the cause necessarily for sort of the sell-off in Bitcoin back a couple of years ago. I think another dynamic to kind of think about is that now there's a lot of futures products in the crypto space. So people have been able to be short crypto assets for quite a few years now. So the notion that launching an Ethereum future product would allow traders to get short for the first time, I think the fundamental market dynamics have now changed, and that is not a new concept for Ethereum. We've been able to short Ethereum for quite a long time now. So that's why I don't think there's sort of that same bearishness on the Ethereum futures launch. I think a few things that are really interesting on Ethereum from a fundamental perspective. So you have Ethereum basically launching the beacon chain for Ethereum 2.0. You have some of these exchanges such as Coinbase that are going to offer staking on Ethereum. So basically Ethereum is going to have a yield now. So if you stake your ETH 1.0 into the beacon chain and you have ETH 2.0, you basically going to yield around 7.5%. And that's a service that Coinbase is going to be offering. It's a service that Kraken offers, so on and so forth. Something that's very interesting in the future space, in the new CME future that just launched. And I'm wondering to see how this plays out. So for example, the current future that's expiring in about 4 days is trading around 1780 right now. And then if you're looking at 3 months from now, the future is trading about 1880. So there's sort of a premium of $100 on the Ethereum future with 100 days till delivery. But what's interesting is that if ETH is a yielding asset, you should have like more of a backwardated futures curve because the yield should be brought out. So there's going to be an arbitrage there. So I actually think that future Ethereum futures calendars could be really interesting. There's probably some sort of pricing inefficiency right there. And then from a volatility perspective, so kind of two things. We've had sort of this realized volatility squash over the past week as Ethereum's just consolidated around the $2,000 mark for so long that volatility pretty much just got squashed with the exception of today with the pullback. So we're seeing a huge premium in the implied vol market versus the realized vol market. So for example, the implied vol market is pricing around 130% vol for between 10 to 20 days. And then a 10-day realized vol is about 110. So there's definitely something there. There's definitely some juice being priced into these options. I do think there's an opportunity to short vol in this context. But that being said, there's also sort of this risk of, well, what happens if Elon Musk says he wants to allocate $1 billion to Ethereum on his balance sheet as well? Or what happens if some other private company decides to add, diversify their crypto exposure to Ethereum? So I definitely think, although the vol is juicy to sell here, there's a little bit of this tail phenomenon. So you wouldn't want to just do that naked. So that's just something to keep in mind. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of opportunity on both those fronts.
Let's talk about some of that juice out there. The 1 hour vol last week on the Tuesday kind of rundown, it was about almost 130%, 128%, and it's still around that level right now out there in ETH land, about 132%. So we haven't seen a huge vol swing over the course of the past week. A SKEW-wise bit of a different story. We were talking about a 17 in the positive direction. Remember, that's that 30-20 SKEW that Greg just broke down earlier about how they do it with Bitcoin. Same deal with ETH. Coming into today's show now, it's about a negative 0.26, so it swung quite a bit in the other direction. Of course, a lot of this also reflected in the strong volume numbers we're seeing out there from an ETH options perspective. Again, going out to the notional value, what's going up out there. Most days of the past week were north, all of them were pretty much north of 175 million, I think, except for one, and 220 million was hit multiple times, including today, which is pretty high up there. We saw some other previous highs back earlier this year, the January 4th, 264 million, on the 19th, 286 million. So didn't quite hit that last week, but we had multiple days coming close to it. So it was a pretty active week out there from an overall ETH options perspective. It's also reflected out there in the OI. Remember, a little bit of a smaller contract here. So these numbers a little bit higher than what we're seeing from an overall contract perspective out there in Bitcoin land. 804,000 contracts open on the call side, 625,000 contracts open on the puts. And in terms of open interest, hour by hour on our last show was just shy of 1.3 million, about 1.28 million. Now it's about 1.4, a little bit north of that, actually, about 1.41 million. So interesting to see what happens to these numbers once February rolls off the board. If we see a huge culling like we saw at the end of January, there probably will be. We'll see how quickly it makes it up. But if these notional volume numbers are going to continue, that's a lot of paper hitting the tape. Probably won't take long for that, to make those numbers back up. In terms of where you're landing from an overall expiration cycle perspective, where you folks are trading out there right now, it's March. Again, ETH in particular tends to like a quarterly. 434,000 contracts open in the monthly March contract. We're not even adding in the weeklies. This is just the monthly expiration. Feb has about 313,000. That's all going the way of the dodo in a few days, listeners. It'll be interesting to see how this repositions, if it goes into April, if it goes out into June, which is starting to come on strong as well, threatening 250,000 contracts open already. Again, going back to that narrative that crypto does like a quarterly. I'm curious about this, Greg. I'd like to get your opinion on this because I know you're a hardcore ETH guy. You've been watching and trading in this space for a long time. The strikes in ETH are very fascinating to me as well. We talked about kind of the outlandish upside strikes that we have open and trading. Not that much upside anymore. They're actually in the money now, but they were outlandish upside not too long ago in Bitcoin. We kind of have the opposite issue in ETH. The number one strike, and it has been for some time out here, the 400 strike, which, like I said, we just crossed the 2,000 level last weekend, listeners, at about a 1,700 and change coming into showtime. So that's roughly 1/4 of where ETH is trading right now. It's about 87,000 contracts open. That's about the same as it was on our last show. The second strike, second most active in terms of open interest, I shouldn't say most active, the second most sizable position that is open out there is the 480 strike. Again, that number hasn't decreased either. It's still about the same open interest as it was on our last strike. Then number 3 is the 320 strike. 68,000 open there. Again, about the same. None of these have come off at all. You got to go all the way out to number 4 to get a strike that's even remotely relevant. That's the 1,600 strike with about 67,000 contracts open. That's added about 3,000 since our last show. Greg, does that surprise you that you have these extremely deep in the money strikes that are still dominating the tape? Or maybe does that not surprise you? It's the hardcore ETH hodlers, and they don't care if you blow 1,000 points through their strike. They're still holding on to those bad boys.
That's funny. I actually do find that a little bit surprising. I think part of that flow must have been pre kind of breakout. So I think, over summer we were trading that range. So maybe people established positions back then and sort of just held on to them. But then also what we saw about 2 weeks ago was we saw some deep in the money paper go through on Bitcoin. So we were seeing 16,000 June calls being traded against 18,000 December calls. And there's this really weird deep in the money diagonal paper. And we're sort of wondering, what's that flow? Like, what are people doing? And it turns out that actually that flow is really a good way to trade future spreads. And so if you're seeing a lot of this deep in the money paper going through, it's less of a options position and more of trading sort of the June spread versus the June future versus the December future, and getting some sort of synthetic exposure to future spreads. So I definitely think there's an appetite there as well for this deep in the money paper from a futures perspective.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Obviously, at this point, it's pretty much a future. There's not much of an option left to it at this point. But fascinating stuff. I keep expecting these strikes to wind down because, like I said, they have been open for some time, for several months at least now. And we haven't really seen them decrease. We've seen them add a little bit, but it's just been fascinating to watch. You think at a certain point, someone would come in and take a good bunch of this off the board and maybe reposition it, readjust it, take some profits I know that's heresy in the world of crypto, but you are allowed to take some profits every now and then out there. Let's see what's going on from another leading altcoin perspective. Ripple actually having a decent run up, not quite 10 cents, about 9 cents. So threatening that 60-cent level coming into today's show, is up about 51 cents on our last show. So it's had a nice little ride. It keeps rallying up to this 60 to 75 level, then it gets chopped down again. I said before, it seems like there are some sellers lurking out there. They're on that 75-cent level, and they get that chance to unload it. When they do, they hit it. So that does seem like it keeps XRP down. Of course, there have been some other negative headlines that have kind of been lurking to not quite have XRP get caught up in the crypto tsunami that seems to be carrying everything else along with it. Also has been carrying Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV to the downside, at least since our last check-in on Tuesday there. 77 points to the dark side for Bitcoin Cash, and Bitcoin SV down about 21 points since Tuesday. Also, what's up ever so slightly? 0.0017 is Doge. I have to ask you about this, Greg. This has kind of been the story outside of Bitcoin and the Doge has kind of been what everyone has been talking about. It started off as a joke. It was hard to take it seriously, and yet it became very real for some time. As I mentioned, it briefly, ever so briefly, broke into the top 10. So we have to know, Greg, when you guys going to start adding the Doge analytics to Genesis, sir?
Well, I would love it if someone created some on-chain Dogecoin options. I would say that Doge is, I've always been bearish Doge. I don't own Doge. I don't want to own Doge. But it's sort of been one of these short seller widow makers where there's some exchanges on there where you can actually short Doge. And every once in a while, you get this crazy Doge rally. And so it's one of those things that I just kind of don't want to touch to the short side or the long side. It's got this meme cult following that it's hard to bet against, and at the same time, like, I wouldn't want to have any of my net worth or life savings associated to it either.
So you're not throwing a bunch of Doge in the back pocket for a rainy day out there to use it to fund the continued evolution of Genesis volatility, Greg?
Nope. I am not sure what I dislike more, fiat or Doge. It's a tough one.
Well, if you don't like fiat, stay tuned for some of our listener comments. I think they'll be along with you as we head right on into the crypto questions.
You've got questions about crypto. Who doesn't? It's time to find out the answers to your crypto questions.
All right, like I mentioned, you guys have many thoughts on many different aspects of the crypto marketplace. Let's kick it off here with Revon Gorge's regular listener, regular writer and chimer inner. He says, I see Bitcoin mining stocks going up like Riot and Mara. And yeah, Revon, they have been moving quite a bit of late. He goes on to write, but isn't it cheaper to just buy Bitcoin or the crypto and just hold it yourself? Is there any advantages to buying into the mining companies? It seems like they just charge a percentage to buy Bitcoin. I think it depends what you mean by cheaper. I think a lot of people are looking at this. It's the same reason we see, USO trade in a lot of the equity accounts out there versus, the futures out there on WTI or the options on the futures. People want to be able to put it in a securities account first and foremost. So these mining stocks and ETFs like USO and others, or maybe the forthcoming Bitcoin ETF, they serve that function. They allow you to put it in your traditional securities account without having to open up, let's say, a Coinbase or a Kraken or a futures account to trade the futures out there, whatever the case may be. It's all in one account. That's appealing to a lot of people. Be cheaper. I mean, look at, we were just talking about Bitcoin, obviously at north of 50,000. You have Mara, even though it's inflated quite a bit of late. This is at 37.65. So people are looking at that just from a basic mathematical perspective. They say, hey, I can buy a couple of thousand shares of that maybe, or a couple of hundred at the very least. I can't even buy one Bitcoin. So they probably are doing that math as well. You can take issues with that, but from an overall capital allocation perspective, they could allocate and get a larger piece of the pie in a Mara or in a Riot than they can in Bitcoin. Also, these bad boys are usually optionable, at least, so that you have the additional fun of being able to trade an actual listed option on something that holds Bitcoin. I think that has a lot of interest and value to people out there as well. So cheaper is a relative term. Obviously, these things are inflated. Their valuations, I'm not going to argue about their valuations. I'll let the folks go out there and do this. Looks like Mara topped out at 47.90. It's off about 10 points from there. Let's see how high Riot got in the fervor out there. It got up to 77.90. Is that now 65.70 or so? So both of them off their recent apexes out there in the Musk frenzy. But still, we teach people on our network to trade options themselves rather than buying these structured products, because they do charge you exorbitant fees to do things you could do yourself, like buy a put. You don't need to pay someone a percentage to do that. You can do that yourself. So there is an argument to be made. If you want to just go out and you have the savvy to do it and you could allocate your capital efficiently, then yeah, go trade the underlying. But I think for a lot of folks who they want to try to swing for the fences, think maybe they missed the boat on Bitcoin. They don't do the back of the napkin math that massive valuation out there in Bitcoin ties into this valuation here on Bitcoin. And if that comes in, that could, of course, hurt these numbers as well. But I think there's a lot of that driving this action as well, Revon. Greg, is that your thought as well, why folks are piling into some of these equities rather than Bitcoin itself, sir?
Yeah, 100%. And some of these equities have shown a higher beta as well with respect to percentage gains versus Bitcoin. What's interesting, though, is that the vol on some of these companies is so much higher than Bitcoin. And you've actually seen sort of a breakdown in the past week of that beta. So, for example, MicroStrategy pretty much did nothing last week, and Bitcoin continued to rally all the way up to 58,000. And so you have this differential in sort of price action, yet the MicroStrategy implied vol is trading something around, out of the money options is trading around 170, whereas the Bitcoin vol is going to be trading around like 105, 110. So there's sort of like this implied vol bet to be done as well. So there's definitely some stuff to be some opportunities to be mined there between the two underlying commodity itself, the Bitcoin and the company equities.
Yeah, they are optional. I'm looking at Mara right now. If you're wondering, the at-the-money vol is about 171% out there in the Mara front month options going out at the end of this week. Again, that's a weekly, so it's mostly gamma at that point, but still fascinating stuff afoot. Good question out here. Last show we had a buddy, Mr. Bill Ulivari from Senecal Capital on. We were just talking about, it was right not that long after the whole Tesla Bitcoin brouhaha. And Bill said he didn't like it when companies got out of their core competencies. He said he was more negative on Bitcoin and Tesla as a result. And we had a listener, Richard Bruce, chime in saying they hold cash on the balance sheet and now they hold some Bitcoin. What competency are we talking about? One is fixed in supply, which is Bitcoin, he puts in parentheses. The other, US dollars, is being printed at an exponential rate. The Bitcoin sits there and life goes on, does not affect Tesla business. Obviously, this is a contentious issue. You combine anything Tesla with Bitcoin, you're going to have the Venn diagram of the two people who trade them. A, they overlap quite a bit. And B, they tend to be, shall we say, opinionated about those positions out there. So yeah, Bruce taking the other side of that. What are your thoughts in general, Greg, on Tesla and indeed Mr. Papa Musk there just diving in with both feet on all things Bitcoin and then pumping it up to his Twitter followers?
Well, besides being hilarious, I think it's pretty interesting. So I definitely think private companies allocating balance sheet to crypto is extremely bullish for crypto, and it gives crypto a lot of validity. I think the perspective of as an investor, if I own a portfolio and I own a portfolio of all these equities and I own Tesla and I own all these other tech companies, and these tech companies decide to start allocating balance sheet to Bitcoin from an investor's perspective, I do think that it's a little bit of a divergence, or it's not exactly what I'm looking for. I bought companies because I think that company has an edge in that sector. And if I want some Bitcoin to my portfolio as an investor, I can just go ahead and add Bitcoin as an allocation to my portfolio. I don't need the CEO of a private company to add Bitcoin to their balance sheet to get me exposure as an investor. So I do think there's sort of like a portfolio concentration risk that, mutual funds and people like that should think about. I also think that private companies, buying into the notion of Bitcoin, seeing the idea that we can't just print infinity money, there's consequences to it. Also, sort of, it's kind of a next, Bitcoin's a global asset. So there's a little bit of this idea that, not only am I leaving fiat, but as an American company, I'm also leaving sort of the US dollar system as well. So there's sort of that perspective as well. So long story short, if I'm a mutual fund investor, I need to understand that my portfolio is getting concentrated with risks that I might have not thought about before. As a crypto enthusiast and as a believer in crypto myself, I think it's great for the space, extremely bullish, and I'm definitely happy to see it, and I think we're going to see a lot more of it.
Well said, sir. I like it. Of course, you did dare to say negative things about Bitcoin and or Papa Musk, so they're going to be coming for you on Twitter. Just to prepare yourself there, sir, as we go forward here. Next, we got Cash & Co. He also had thoughts on what Bill said on the show last time. He said he was laughing his butt off, to use the family-friendly version there. He says, as Elon says, Tesla is a collection of 12 different startups. Crypto looks like a new division of that collection. And then he added, for good measure, 3 unicorn emojis. Well, there you go. Crypto is now the latest startup division of Tesla. They already got SpaceX in there. They got the solar stuff. They got everything in there. So why not have a crypto division as well? Concrete Jack, he's part of, looks like the Doge army here. He says, after our last show as well, we were talking about Doge. How could you not? He said, you should probably dump $500 into Doge and forget about it for a few years. It's the more popular crypto with the younger people. There you go. So it's probably a sure thing. Got 5,098 shares for $440 today. He says it's a low risk trade out there. So there you go. Greg, Mr. Concrete Jack, taking the other side of your trade. He says, the hell with it. I'm throwing $500 I never want to see again into Doge, sir. What do you think about that?
I mean, that's a very reasonable way of doing it. If you're spending $500 and you're just playing for sort of a what if scenario, that's totally chill. I'm talking about if you're putting a large significant portion of your net worth into it. I think there's just so many better projects with so much more kind of revolutionary concepts to it that I almost think that there's an opportunity cost to owning Doge as opposed to like an Ethereum or a Polkadot or some of these DeFi projects. I mean, there's so many interesting DeFi projects, and Doge is just not one of them.
I got more Doge comments. We had Bill on the show last time said Doge is a joke. He's exact same comment you just made here, Greg. Bill said, we have real projects in crypto that are making a real impact on the world, but they can't catch a break, yet Doge is making all of this news. I question my own sanity sometimes. And Anacott Steele, by the way, great handle. Throwback to the old Wall Street movie there, listeners, if you don't know that one. He just responded to that and said, the power of the Messiah Elon. Well, yeah, he certainly did. He did, of course, throw some love Doge's way as well. So that, of course, accounting for a lot of the move. But we also said one of our shows last week, I think this might have been the option block. We said, forget silver. The most crowded short trade out there is in the dollar. I think this was your buddy there, Mr. Meatball, AKA Mr. Sebastian. He said, I think this is a complete setup and the silver squeeze won't really amount to much. That was heading into all that talk of, okay, here was the next big short squeeze. It was silver. And Colby Wilson wrote in with the most crypto of all crypto responses. He says, F the dollar, hashtag Bitcoin. I like that. Also, let's wrap it up on this one. A little bit of love. These guys have written in before. I think Merpetual chiming in again, just saying they like your stuff, Greg. They picked up on Genesis Vol because they listened to the show, and they said they became exposed to a whole nother ball game, as he puts it, Bitcoin and ETH derivatives and complex data aggregated onto a semi-free platform. You guys, Genesis Vol, have interesting data for Bitcoin options. So there you go, Greg. The listeners throwing a little love the Genesis Vol way, sir.
Oh, I love it. I love to hear it. That's very nice. One of the questions that I get all the time, and I think this is just a perfect response. One of the questions I get all the time is, should I trade stock options, or should I trade stocks, or should I trade crypto options or underlying? And the response that I say all the time is, when you're trading stocks, there's people who've been doing that game for 70 years, and they have a lot of experience and a lot of information edge on you. When you're trading crypto, it's almost anyone's game. It's like a brand new asset class. It's a paradigm shifting asset class. No one even thought about digital assets 15 years ago. And so it's a level playing field. So if you're going to cut your teeth in one of the spaces, you might as well start with a level playing field and start building an edge in being around for a while and getting experience in these markets.
Well said, sir. Unfortunately, that music means we've come to the end of yet another epic journey through the world of all things crypto. Man, we talked about so much today. Bitcoin, the SKEW, the volume, the volatility, all that good stuff, and a whole bunch more. ETH, XRP, DOGECOin, your thoughts on all of the above. Threw some Tesla in there as well as a whole bunch more. Remember, you guys have comments or questions, you know where to find us. You guys have no shortage of opinions on all this stuff. Add options on most of the major social media platforms. Of course, head over to theoptionsinsider.com and hit us up there as well. Of course, you can always leave comments. And of course, remember, if you like the show, rate and review it in all the platforms. It's available everywhere, adding new platforms all the time. I think Amazon Music just added it not too long ago everywhere else. So it's pretty much available anywhere you can get audio at this point. So keep rating and review. It does help the new folks, particularly out there in the crypto realm, discover these crazy things we're talking about called options. And Greg, if our listeners are like Merpetual here and they want to discover the Genesis Volatility platform and all you guys are bringing to the table, where should they go? What should they do?
Yes, so you can follow us on Twitter. We have a Twitter handle at Genesis Vol. We have a weekly newsletter where we basically recap some of the activity in the crypto options market. That can be found at genesisvolatility.substack.com. And lastly, our product suite, which has a free tier and a premium tier, is found at gvol.io. That's GVOL.io.
There you go. gvol.io is the place to go to kick the tires and light the fires. If you like all this stuff we're talking about, the 1 hour vol, the 30-20 SKEW, the changes in open interest, the strikes that are open, the months, all that stuff comes from the Genesis Volatility platform. So check it out, gvol.io. If you're trading these, if you're learning about this space, I can't imagine doing it without that sort of data in hand. Genesis Volatility, gvol.io is the place to go. And on behalf of Greg and indeed myself, I want to thank all of you out there for downloading, streaming, subscribing, for listening live, for sending in so many great, many, and varied opinions and thoughts and questions. Keep them coming. We'll be back again tomorrow. Of course, interview Tuesday, then on again to Education Wednesday. Remember, Options Bootcamp, Options Playbook Radio, 2 shows for a lot of you out there, maybe in this audience, who are not as familiar with all things options. Those are 2 great low-stress ways to get up to speed about these options things. And Thursday, we're back with a double dose of TWIFO and a second episode of the Option Block. Friday, Volatility Views. Then it all kicks off again next week on Monday with another episode of the Option Block, and then right on into another episode of the Crypto Rundown.
This program is brought to you by Genesis Volatility, also known as GVol, home of institutional-grade crypto options analytics. Whether you're trading CeFi options or DeFi options, cryptocurrencies move. Use GVol Analytics to analyze implied volatility, model realized volatility, structure positions, and unlock alpha. For more information, visit gvol.io. That's GVOL.io. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.